Our word for this week that we're going to focus on is sacrifice. Say it with me, sacrifice. As we take a look at this word, there we go. I want to talk about what it means. It's God's power for you to give up something to help others. That's talking about real sacrifice, true sacrifice. A lot of people can give up stuff, but when it comes to God-pleasing sacrifice, it's you giving something up, but God is giving you the power and the faith and the drive to do it. And it actually does something for somebody else. Here's another way of saying it. Giving up something you have a right to, so others have something they have no right to. In other words, you have something that you could keep. It would be okay. It's not wrong for you to keep it. And somebody doesn't have any right to say that's theirs, but you take from what you have and you suffer, you go without, so they have. It's like having $10 to get into the movie, and you're going to go to the movie, but then somebody's there and wants a ticket, and you take your $10 and give it to them. They get in the movie, but you don't. So you notice it, you feel it. That's a sacrifice. You actually give something up. Another way to say it, giving up to give out. In other words, it's for somebody else. A sacrifice. Now, ultimately, we see that sacrifice in our God. God had his people sacrifice in order to point them to his ultimate sacrifice in Jesus. Throughout the Old Testament, including in the account of Abraham, but also with Moses and his people, he had tons of sacrifices. People did it all the time. Now, killing those animals and giving them up didn't actually do anything for sins. God didn't need that. But what God had them do that for was so every time they'd sacrifice something and give something up to show God how much they loved him, they would think about the ultimate sacrifice that God had already promised to do that will be done in Jesus. So all those sacrifices were meant to be a picture or a type or a forecast, a preview of what Jesus would do. And that's why after Jesus came and sacrificed himself on the cross, God's people don't do that. They don't need to do those sacrifices anymore. Because Jesus is already here, we can look at that sacrifice. Jesus was the great high priest. The priestly office in the Old Testament was one that prayed for God's people and made sacrifices for God's people. Everything was from God's people to God. That's what the priest did, from God's people to God. And so Jesus, as the great high priest, had to offer the great sacrifice, and he offered himself once for all time to pay for the sins of the world. Didn't have to do it twice, doesn't have to keep on doing it, once for all. And Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice because he was true God and truly human. So he could be truly human, so he could die, so he could be a substitute for humans like you and me, and so he could actually give up a perfect human life. He had to be human in order to really pay for the sins of the world, but he had to be God in order to be perfect, in order for his sacrifice to be worth enough to pay for everybody. If he was just a human, even a perfect human could only substitute himself for one other person. But he was God, which allowed him to suffer once for everybody. He was the God-man who was the perfect sacrifice for the world. And that's why we're all excited about the word sacrifice. Jesus' sacrifice is what gets us excited about sacrificing for others. That's an amazing sacrifice.